The night sky above Earth burned with streaks of violet fire, the death throes of orbital defense stations torn apart by the invading fleet. The Drak'Thir Dominion had come without warning, descending upon human cities with cold efficiency, their warships dark silhouettes against the flames engulfing the planet. The world's armies had rallied, unleashing every weapon at their disposal, but the outcome had been clear from the moment the first of the alien dropships breached the atmosphere. Humanity was losing. Jack Reynolds crouched in the shadows of a ruined skyscraper, rifle steady as he observed the movements of the patrol below. 3 Drak'Thir soldiers, massive bipedal creatures clad in segmented armor that shimmered like obsidian, moved through the debris-strewn streets, their clawed hands gripping plasma rifles that could reduce a man to ash in an instant. Jack had spent a lifetime training to fight the deadliest enemies Earth had to offer, but nothing had prepared him for these monsters. He tightened his grip on the trigger. A single, precise shot would put one of them down, but the moment he fired, the others would descend upon him like a storm. His mind ran through the calculations, honed instincts weighing risk against necessity. He exhaled slowly and let the moment pass. Reckless engagements had no place in this war. Not anymore. Jack had been a Navy SEAL, part of the elite force tasked with handling operations no one else could. That had been years ago. When the Drak'Thir came, he had already left that life behind, choosing solitude over service. Now, as the last remnants of humanity clung to survival in the shattered husks of their cities, his past had come rushing back with brutal clarity. The battlefield was his home again, and the enemy was one he could not afford to lose against. A distant explosion rumbled across the city, casting long shadows against the crumbling facades of abandoned buildings. The Drak'Thir patrol turned toward the sound, their helmets tilting as they exchanged guttural commands in their native tongue. A moment later they moved on, leaving Jack to sink back into the darkness. He had no illusions about humanity's chances. The Drak'Thir were not just conquerors, they were executioners. Every world they touched was stripped bare, its people either enslaved or annihilated. Earth was simply the latest in a long line of fallen civilizations. The underground resistance, if it could even be called that, was scattered and desperate. Civilian survivors hid where they could, too terrified to fight back. Most of the military had been obliterated in the first wave, their weapons proving useless against alien energy shields. Jack had seen hardened soldiers break, their spirits crushed beneath the sheer brutality of the invasion. He had refused to be one of them. Moving with practiced silence, he slipped through the ruins, following a path mapped out in his mind. He had spent weeks studying the Drak'Thir's movements, noting their patrol patterns, supply lines, and vulnerabilities. The aliens were powerful, but they were not infallible. They relied on overwhelming force, on the belief that no species could stand against them. Jack intended to prove them wrong. A flickering hollow display, half buried in rubble, cast a sickly blue glow over the remains of what had once been a bustling avenue. The face of Lord Xyrax, supreme commander of the Drak'Thir invasion force, stared out from the broken screen, his reptilian features a grotesque mixture of arrogance and contempt. The message looped endlessly, a declaration of humanity's surrender. Jack's lip curled in disgust. Surrender wasn't an option. Not for him. He made his way to the hidden entrance of an underground bunker, knocking in a coded sequence against the rusted metal door. A tense moment passed before the locks disengaged, and the heavy slab of steel slid open just enough for a pair of wary eyes to meet his. Recognition flickered, and the door swung wider. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sweat, oil, and desperation. A dozen survivors huddled in the dim light, men and women who had once been soldiers, engineers, or simply unlucky enough to be caught in the crossfire. Their leader, an aging Marine named Carter, greeted Jack with a weary nod. "Any luck?" Carter's voice was rough, strained from too many nights without sleep. Jack pulled a battered datapad from his pack and set it on the makeshift table. Patrol routes, weak points in their security grid. "It's not much, but it's something." Carter scanned the data, his frown deepening. "We're running out of time. They're closing in on every safe zone we have left. We need a real plan, not just scavenged intel." Jack leaned against the table, arms crossed. "There's no winning this war conventionally. We can't match their firepower, but we don't have to. We hit them where they don't expect it. Sabotage, disruption, make their occupation as costly as possible." A younger soldier, barely more than a kid, scoffed. "That's not a plan. That's a death wish." Jack's gaze hardened. "Then die sitting in this hole. But if you want to fight, we do it my way." Silence stretched between them before Carter exhaled heavily. "All right. We'll do it your way. But you better have more than just talk, Reynolds." Jack nodded. He had more than talk. He had a target. And soon, the Drak'Thir would learn what it meant to fear a human. The night air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and ozone, remnants of another battle lost. Jack Reynolds crouched low in the ruins of an old shopping complex, his fingers brushing against the cold steel of his rifle as he watched the Drak'Thir patrol move below. 5 of them this time, larger than the last group, their armor gleaming under the pale light of a shattered moon. Their movements were precise, methodical, but they weren't careful. They didn't have to be. Humanity had taught them no reason to be afraid. Jack intended to change that. He took a slow breath, forcing his pulse to steady. The resistance had taken its first real step the night before, an ambush that had left a Drak'Thir supply convoy in flames. It wasn't a victory, not in any grand sense, but it had been a statement. The enemy had taken notice. Their patrols had doubled, their security tightened. The Dominion did not tolerate defiance. But Jack knew their kind. He had seen men like them before, warlords, dictators, conquerors who believed their power made them invincible. They all had one weakness: arrogance. The Drak'Thir thought of humans as little more than pests to be exterminated. They relied on brute strength and overwhelming numbers, assuming that alone was enough to win. Jack was going to teach them otherwise. He waited, motionless, as the patrol passed beneath him. Then, in a single fluid motion, he dropped from his perch, landing silently behind the last soldier. The blade in his hand was already moving before the alien could react, slicing cleanly through the segmented armor at its neck. The Drak'Thir staggered forward, a gurgling hiss escaping from its ruined throat before collapsing to the ground. The others spun, weapons rising. Jack was already moving. A flash of plasma seared past his shoulder as he ducked behind a rusted-out vehicle, his fingers closing around the grenade at his belt. He pulled the pin, counted 2 heartbeats, then lobbed it over the hood. The explosion was deafening in the stillness of the night, sending a shockwave through the air. Jack was on them before the dust settled. His rifle kicked against his shoulder, the sharp crack of gunfire cutting through the smoke. The second Drak'Thir went down with a hole punched clean through its chest. The third staggered, its armor scorched and cracked, but Jack was already there, driving his combat knife between its ribs before twisting hard. The fourth soldier roared, its massive clawed hand lashing out. Jack barely ducked in time, the force of the strike splitting the concrete where he had stood a moment before. He rolled, bringing his rifle up, but the alien was faster than its bulk suggested. A clawed foot caught him square in the chest, sending him skidding across the pavement. Pain flared through his ribs, but Jack forced himself up, coughing blood onto the asphalt. The Drak'Thir loomed over him, plasma rifle aimed at his skull. Jack tensed, ready to lunge, but before the alien could fire, a single gunshot rang out. The Drak'Thir's head snapped back, dark blood spraying from a hole between its reptilian eyes. It crumpled, dead before it hit the ground. Jack turned, catching a glimpse of Carter lowering his rifle from a rooftop above. "Thought you could use a hand," the older Marine called down. Jack grunted, pressing a hand to his bruised ribs. "Took you long enough." Carter slid down the fire escape, landing beside him with a smirk. "Figured you had it under control." Jack shook his head, scanning the wreckage. The 5th Drak'Thir was gone, fled into the night. It would bring reinforcements and soon. "We need to move," Jack said. The 2 men vanished into the ruins, slipping away like shadows before the enemy could regroup. Hours later, Jack stood in the dim glow of the Resistance's underground hideout, stripping the armor from one of the dead Drak'Thir soldiers. The plating was heavier than it looked, but flexible, designed to withstand energy-based weapons. Against conventional bullets it was less reliable. That was the first lesson he had learned from the ambush. The second was that, for all their supposed superiority, the Drak'Thir bled just like anything else. Carter crossed his arms, watching as Jack tested the weight of a salvaged plasma rifle. "You're thinking of using their own gear against them?" Jack nodded. "Their weapons, their armor. The more we take, the less they have. And the better we understand how they fight." Carter exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "You're pushing them, Reynolds? They're going to come down on us hard." "Good." Jack snapped the rifle's energy cell into place, the weapon humming to life in his grip. "Let them." Carter gave him a long, searching look before nodding. He didn't like it, but he understood. The fight wasn't about survival anymore. It was about proving to the Drak'Thir that humanity wouldn't break. The first step had been taken. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the invasion began, the enemy had something new to fear. The air inside the stolen Drak'Thir dropship was thick with the acrid scent of burning circuits and scorched metal. Jack Reynolds tightened his grip on the alien flight controls, feeling the subtle tremor of the ship's thrusters struggling against the modifications he had jury-rigged. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. Had to. Carter sat beside him, double-checking the stolen Drak'Thir armor strapped over his body. The fit was awkward, human physiology didn't align perfectly with the enemy's design, but with the right adjustments, it was convincing enough. Behind them, 3 other resistance fighters sat in tense silence, their expressions hidden beneath looted helmets. Beneath the disguise they were still human. Fragile. Mortal. But so far, the Drak'Thir had failed to understand that human desperation made them dangerous. Jack's voice was steady as he spoke. We go in fast. We hit hard. We get the data and get out. No heroics. Carter let out a dry chuckle. Coming from you, that's almost funny. Jack ignored him, refocusing on the descent. Below them, the Drak'Thir command outpost stretched across the ruined landscape like a cancerous wound, massive towers of obsidian metal surrounded by energy barriers that pulsed with a sickly red glow. This was where the enemy controlled their occupation efforts. It was where they coordinated their attacks. It was also where they stored the intelligence Jack needed. He adjusted their trajectory, guiding the ship toward the landing bay. The disguise had worked so far. No alarms had sounded. He forced himself to breathe evenly, to still the restless energy coiling in his muscles. He had been in worse situations before. The key was controlling the fear. Using it. The ship touched down with a controlled thud. Outside, hulking Drak'Thir warriors moved with calculated precision, their forms barely visible through the viewing window. Jack signaled to the others and one by one they moved toward the exit ramp. The moment they stepped into the bay, Jack felt the weight of 100 alien eyes on them. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to fight, to run. But that wasn't the plan. Not yet. A towering Drak'Thir officer approached, its black armor marked with blood-red sigils of rank. Its voice was a guttural snarl, words shaped by a mouth not meant for human speech. Jack's stolen helmet translated the message with cold efficiency. You are late. Report, ***. Jack straightened his stance, mimicking the rigid posture of the enemy soldiers he had studied. Transporting high-priority equipment for Supreme Commander Xyrax. The officer's narrow eyes locked onto him, analyzing, dissecting. Jack willed himself to remain still. Authorization code. Jack's pulse pounded in his ears. This was the gamble. He had cracked portions of the Drak'Thir's encrypted communications, but their authorization codes shifted constantly. The one he had stolen might work. Or it might condemn them all. He transmitted the code through the suit's interface. The alien officer's eyes flickered over his display, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. Jack's fingers hovered near the concealed blade at his wrist. Then, with a low grunt, the officer stepped aside. Proceed. Jack exhaled slowly and led his team deeper into the heart of the command center. The corridors were a maze of shifting walls and luminescent glyphs that pulsed like veins beneath obsidian surfaces. Jack moved with purpose, scanning for security nodes, access panels, anything that could lead them to the Dominion core, where the Drak'Thir stored critical battle data, fleet coordinates, and, most importantly, the weakness Jack had spent months searching for. The team moved in practiced formation, their stolen armor granting them passage through the labyrinthine halls. But every step forward tightened the knot in Jack's gut. The Drak'Thir weren't stupid. Eventually, someone would question their presence. They reached a heavily reinforced door marked by glowing sigils of warning. This was it. Jack motioned for Carter to cover the hall while he accessed the control panel. The alien interface was an enigma of shifting symbols, but Jack had spent enough time deciphering their language to force his way through. With a final keystroke, the door hissed open. Beyond it, the Dominion core loomed like the pulsing heart of a mechanical beast. Monolithic consoles projected holographic streams of data into the air, while thick cables snaked across the chamber like the roots of some ancient, malevolent tree. Jack didn't hesitate. He moved to the nearest console, plugging in the stolen data drive. The device hummed as it began extracting every scrap of information the resistance needed. Then the alarm started. A guttural snarl echoed through the chamber as the officer from the landing bay strode into the room, flanked by heavily armed enforcers. You were clever, human. But not clever enough. ***. Jack didn't bother responding. He was already moving. His rifle snapped up, a burst of stolen plasma fire lancing toward the nearest enemy. The enforcer dropped, armor smoking. Chaos erupted as Carter and the others engaged, blue energy bolts carving through the air. The enemy returned fire, the air thick with the heat of battle. Jack ducked behind a console, his mind racing. The data transfer was only halfway complete. He needed more time. A Drak'Thir warrior lunged, massive blade flashing. Jack twisted, catching the strike on his forearm plate before driving his knife upward into the alien's throat. Dark blood sprayed, but there was no time to react before another was upon him. He fired point blank, the shot searing through armor and flesh alike. Carter shouted over the gunfire. "Jack, we need to go." "Not yet." Jack snarled, eyes locked on the data readout. 90%. A massive force slammed into him from the side, sending him sprawling. Lord Xyrax himself stepped into the room, his crimson cloak flowing behind him like the tide of a rising storm. The Drak'Thir warlord was larger than the others, his armor etched with the scars of 1,000 battles. His gaze locked onto Jack with something almost like amusement. "I had hoped to meet you." Jack wiped blood from his mouth. "Sorry to disappoint." Xyrax moved with terrifying speed, his clawed hand closing around Jack's throat and lifting him effortlessly from the ground. "Your kind is weak. Unworthy. Do you truly believe you can defy us?" Asterisk asterisk. Jack's vision blurred at the edges, but he managed to smirk. "Yeah," he rasped. "I do." The data drive beeped. Transfer complete. Jack's hand snapped to his belt, activating the EMP charge hidden there. A pulse of energy exploded outward, shattering lights, frying systems, sending Xyrax stumbling back. The Dominion core flickered, its data streams collapsing in a cascade of static. Jack hit the ground hard but forced himself up. Carter grabbed his arm, hauling him toward the exit as chaos consumed the room. The resistance fighters fell back, weaving through the corridors as alarms howled. Behind them, Xyrax's enraged roar echoed through the facility. They had what they came for. But now, the full fury of the Dominion would descend upon them. The stolen Drak'Thir dropship tore through the sky like a wounded beast, its engines groaning under the strain of Jack's erratic maneuvers. Plasma fire streaked past them, the pursuing warships spitting death into the night. Every jolt of turbulence sent shockwaves of pain through Jack's battered ribs, but he gritted his teeth and forced the ship forward, fingers white-knuckled against the alien controls. Carter braced himself against the wall of the cockpit, glaring at the flashing red indicators. "We're not gonna make it at this rate. That last hit took out half our shielding." Jack didn't answer. He was too busy trying to keep them alive. The enemy was relentless. The Drak'Thir had underestimated humanity before, but now they understood the truth. Earth's people weren't broken. And that made them dangerous. Behind them, the Dominion core lay in ruins, its data ripped from the heart of the Drak'Thir war machine. Jack had seen the files himself in the seconds before the extraction. Battle plans, supply lines, weaknesses. And one undeniable fact: the Drak'Thir weren't invincible. The stolen data held the key to their defeat. Now they just had to survive long enough to use it. A proximity alarm blared. A Drak'Thir interceptor veered into their path, its sleek, obsidian hull gleaming in the glow of the shattered cityscape below. Jack cursed and yanked the controls hard to the left. The ship banked sharply, scraping against the ruins of a collapsed skyscraper, sparks exploding from its damaged wings. Carter swore. "We can't keep running like this. We need an out." Jack's eyes flicked to the scanner. No clear paths. No safe exits. But then, "There," he growled, jerking his head toward the dead zone on the map. "The storm front." Carter's eyes widened. "That's suicide." Jack forced the ship toward it. The storm raged ahead, a swirling mass of electromagnetic interference, whipping debris, and lightning that tore through the sky like a vengeful god's fury. The Drak'Thir wouldn't follow them in. They were too reliant on their technology, too afraid of losing control. Jack wasn't. The ship shuddered violently as they plunged into the maelstrom. Static crackled through the controls, the engines whining in protest. Darkness swallowed them whole, interrupted only by flashes of electric blue and white as lightning streaked past. Wind screamed against the hull. Carter clutched his seat, eyes flicking between Jack and the malfunctioning sensors. "Tell me you have a plan beyond fly into the apocalypse." Jack didn't. He rode the chaos, trusting instinct over reason. The ship bucked, alarms shrieking in warning, but the enemy fire had stopped. The Drak'Thir had peeled off. He could almost hear their frustration through the storm, hunting him but unable to follow. For now. The ship lurched violently, a sudden downdraft sending them spiraling. Jack fought the controls, every muscle straining as he pulled up, willing the craft to obey. The engine sputtered, caught, and then they broke through. The storm spat them out over an expanse of ruined wasteland, the remnants of Earth's last defenses littering the ground below. Jack exhaled sharply, his body thrumming with adrenaline. They weren't safe not yet, but they had a head start. Carter let out a breath he must have been holding. That was the dumbest, most reckless, completely insane. He clapped a hand on Jack's shoulder. Thing I've ever seen. Hell of a move, Reynolds. Jack allowed himself the briefest smirk before shifting his focus. We need to get this data back to base. We have what we need to hit them where it hurts. Carter's expression sobered. And they know it. Jack nodded. There was no going back. The Drak'Thir would not let this stand. They landed at the Resistance's main outpost, a hidden stronghold buried deep beneath the ruins of an old military base. As soon as the ramp lowered, Jack strode toward the command center, the stolen data drive clutched in his hand. The others followed, their expressions grim but determined. Inside, the room buzzed with anxious energy. Survivors, fighters, engineers, former soldiers, gathered around flickering monitors, scanning intercepted enemy transmissions. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that came before a storm. Jack slammed the data drive onto the table. We have everything we need. Their fleet positions, supply chains, troop deployments. He met the eyes of the Resistance leaders. We can hit them where they don't expect it. We can win. A murmur rippled through the room. Carter crossed his arms. What's the play? Jack leaned over the display, calling up the stolen intelligence. They're moving reinforcements through a refueling station in orbit, one of their biggest supply hubs. We take it out, we cripple their entire front line. A young Resistance member frowned. How the hell do we take out an orbital station? We don't have a fleet. Jack's gaze was cold, unwavering. We don't need one. We get aboard. We overload the core from the inside. Silence. Then Carter let out a low whistle. That's a hell of a long shot. Jack's lips pressed into a hard line. It's a shot. And it's better than waiting to die down here. A voice cut through the tension. They're coming. Everyone turned. A lookout stood by the entrance, face pale. Drak'Thir warships. A full invasion force. They tracked us. Jack's stomach clenched. He turned back to the display. They didn't have time for hesitation. We split forces. Half hold the base, buy us time. The rest come with me. We hit the station. If we pull this off, we cut their throat before they can tighten the noose. Carter studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. Let's end this. The room erupted into movement. Weapons were gathered. Plans set in motion. Jack turned toward the exit, jaw clenched. The Drak'Thir thought they had won. That humanity was weak. They were about to learn the truth.